Welcome to Language Life Lessons, the podcast where we turn everyday awkward moments into opportunities for language growth. I'm Sarah Chen, and today we're diving into something we've all experienced. That moment when someone's name completely escapes us, and we have to navigate the situation in English. Stay tuned for some fascinating stories, expert insights, and practical strategies you can use right away. Before we dive into today's stories, let me share a quick personal experience. Just last week, I was hosting a conference for international professionals, and despite having reviewed the guest list multiple times, I found myself blanking on names left and right. It reminded me that even as a native English speaker, these situations can be challenging. Now, imagine handling that same stress in your second or third language. You're at a business conference, and you spot someone you met last month. You remember having a great conversation about marketing strategies, but their name? Complete blank. For many English learners, this isn't just about forgetting a name. It's about navigating a potentially awkward social situation in their second language. Let's hear from Maria Rodriguez, who turned such a moment into a valuable learning experience.
It was my first week at my new job in Toronto. I had met so many people, and suddenly, in the elevator, I ran into someone who clearly knew me. My mind went blank, both their name and the English phrases I needed to handle the situation gracefully. I panicked and said something like, "Hey, you." The worst part wasn't even forgetting the name. It was feeling like all my English training had abandoned me in that crucial moment. I had spent years studying English, but nothing had prepared me for this specific social situation. Looking back, I realized that traditional language courses often miss these real-world scenarios.
Maria's story touches on something crucial: the gap between classroom English and real-world situations. To help us understand this better, let's bring in our first expert guest, Dr. James Thompson, Professor of Applied Linguistics at Mars University.
The fascinating thing about these situations is that they create what we call high-stakes learning moments. When you're emotionally invested in a social situation, your brain is actually more receptive to learning and retaining new language patterns. It's like your brain says, "I need these phrases to survive socially, so I better remember them." What's particularly interesting is how these moments engage multiple areas of language competency simultaneously. You're not just dealing with vocabulary or grammar, you're managing social relationships, cultural expectations, and nonverbal communication all at once.
Could you elaborate on how these situations differ across cultures?
Absolutely. In some cultures, directly admitting you've forgotten someone's name might be seen as a social faux pas, while in others, it's perfectly acceptable and even endearing. For example, in many English-speaking countries, people often use humor to diffuse these situations. They might say something like, "I'm having one of those days. Your face is familiar, but your name has gone on vacation." This kind of self-deprecating humor is generally well received in English-speaking cultures.
That's fascinating. Let's bring in our second expert, Dr. Emily Watson, a cultural anthropologist specializing in business communications.
What's really interesting about name-forgetting situations is how they reveal cultural power dynamics. In some Asian cultures, for instance, hierarchical relationships are extremely important, and forgetting someone's name, especially a superior's, can be particularly stressful. English learners from these backgrounds often need to learn not just the language, but also the more egalitarian approach to professional relationships common in many English-speaking countries.
After that awkward elevator moment, I decided to learn specific phrases for these situations. My favorite now is "I'm drawing a blank on your name, but I definitely remember you from the marketing meeting." It's honest, professional, and usually gets a sympathetic laugh. But I didn't stop there. I started paying attention to how native English speakers handled similar situations. I noticed they often use what I call buffer phrases, little expressions that buy them time while maintaining social connection. Things like, "It's so good to see you again," or "How have you been since our last meeting?"
That's a brilliant observation about buffer phrases. Dr. Thompson, could you explain why these are so effective?
Buffer phrases serve multiple purposes in conversation. First, they maintain social harmony while our brain searches for the forgotten name. Second, they often prompt the other person to offer more context clues that might help us remember. But most importantly, they demonstrate social competence even when we're experiencing a memory lapse. Let me share a framework I use with my students called the 3 R's of name recovery. Recognize the situation early. Respond with appropriate buffer phrases. Recover gracefully with honest admission if necessary.
This brings us to our expanded practical tips segment. Let's break this down into several categories. First, the honest approach phrases. "I'm sorry, but your name has just slipped my mind." "I remember you perfectly, but I'm blanking on your name right now." "Would you remind me of your name again?" "I'm usually great with names, but I'm drawing a blank right now." "Please help me out with your name. My memory is playing tricks on me today." Second, the social bridge strategies. Mention a specific detail from your last interaction. Ask open-ended questions about their work or recent projects. Use general greetings until someone else uses their name. Reference shared experiences or mutual connections. Compliment something you remember about your previous conversation. Third, the professional context solutions. Keep business cards handy and offer to exchange them. Use LinkedIn or other professional networks to refresh your memory before meetings. Practice active listening when first meeting someone. Create memory associations with distinctive features or shared interests. Let's hear from Alex Kim, an international business consultant who regularly deals with this challenge.
I actually turn these moments into networking opportunities now. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I use it to restart the conversation. "I remember our fascinating discussion about market trends, but please remind me of your name." It shows you value the connection beyond just remembering a name. What's really helped me is developing a system. When I meet someone new, I try to create what I call a memory anchor, connecting their name to something memorable about our interaction. For example, if I meet Sarah, who works in sustainable energy and is passionate about hiking, I might make a mental note, "Solar Sarah, who summits mountains."
That's a brilliant strategy. Dr. Watson, could you share some insights about memory technique?
One effective technique is what we call multimodal association. This involves connecting a person's name to multiple sensory or contextual cues. For example, if you meet someone named Richard who works in research, you might create a mental image of Richard in a laboratory conducting research. The alliteration, Richard Research, helps, and the visual image strengthens the memory connection. Another important aspect is practicing these situations in a low-stakes environment. I encourage my students to role-play these scenarios with friends or language partners. It helps build confidence and automaticity in using the appropriate phrases.
Let's hear one final insight from Maria about how this experience changed her approach to language learning.
The biggest lesson for me wasn't just about managing forgotten names. It was about accepting that these moments are part of the language learning journey. Now, I actually volunteer in a conversation club where we practice these exact scenarios. It's amazing to see how many other learners share this experience and how much we can learn from each other.
As we wrap up today's extended episode, let's remember that these challenging moments aren't just social hurdles. They're opportunities to enhance our language skills and cultural understanding. Here's a final thought from Dr. Thompson.
Every awkward language moment is a chance to learn. The key is to shift from seeing these situations as embarrassing failures to viewing them as natural parts of the language learning journey. Remember, even native speakers forget names. It's how we handle these moments that matters.
Thank you for joining us for this special extended episode of Language Life Lessons. Remember to subscribe for more episodes where we turn everyday challenges into language learning opportunities. Special thanks to our guests Maria Rodriguez, Dr. James Thompson, Dr. Emily Watson, and Alex Kim.